This conversation was sponsored by Dash, digital money made simple. Hello, we're here at Labitconf 2015 in Mexico City, and I'm joined by Evan Duffield, the lead developer of Dash, which is the number 5 cryptocurrency as far as market cap goes. How's your day going?
Well, the day's going fantastic. It's been a really exciting conference so far.
Excellent. All right, so there's a lot happening this conference, and it's gonna be a big announcement from Dash. But before we get into that, which is Dash Evolution, I wanted to ask you about one of the last updates that you did to Dash, which is the governance model. And could you explain a little bit about how it works, and then tell us how the voting process has gone, how the incentives are working out?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, the governance model is built on top of the second tier. And I mean, maybe we should back up a little bit to talk about the layering of the infrastructure and how it works. So we have collateralized full nodes on the network. And these are simply full nodes that have 1,000 Dash input that's attached to them. And that's essentially their identity on the network. And then based off of this, we can do neat things. Since we know who these people are, according to their blockchain identity, they can do secure communication, for example. So we can do secure voting on the network. You pool them together as a giant group of thousands of nodes, and you can then ask them questions, query them about, should we do this or should we do that? And that's generally what the governance model is.
Yeah, and a key aspect of that is that it protects against Sybil attacks. So if you actually want to try to subvert the network in some way, you have to pay 1,000 Dash to be able to have a vote, which is a considerable amount of money. So how has the government's model, I can explain it, I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but basically the inflationary the predictable inflation of Dash is a portion of that has been assigned to projects that are voted on by the community. And if the right amount of votes happens, if enough people approve it, then that money goes towards whatever, marketing, legal fees, particular sections of development, which allows the development of the technology and the network to be decentralized and internal to their own network, rather than be funded by MIT, who's got connections with the White House, or a bunch of other big companies, right? It's a pretty critical advancement. So how has the voting process worked so far?
So essentially what we're going for is something I refer to as decentralized sovereignty. We want to stay decentralized as we grow. And, as a cryptocurrency, we want to maintain our sovereignty. We don't want to be controlled by any of the existing systems, because this thing has to survive for a very, very long time without being led astray by the powers of the be, And so we built these systems very carefully to be adaptive to the current state and the current powers that be. The governance system is not inflationary in the budget system particularly, because we allocate a piece of the reward to this system, and they actually can't go over that piece. And that's 10% of the monthly block reward they're allowed to spend. If they don't spend all of it, it's actually burned. And so it never gets created. And so it's actually a deflationary aspect of the currency then.
Does it require a limited amount of votes to be able to allocate the reward? Like 20% of the network has to vote or something like that, and if they don't, then the money does not get created?
So essentially what happens is we have many proposals on the network. And let's say we have 10 proposals. And then we rank them by the amount of support that they have. And so the first one, let's say we have 80% of the network that voted positively on this. That one definitely gets paid. And the next one's 70%, and the next one's 65%. And these are added to the total budget until we reach the point where all of the budget money is taken, and at which point we stop paying out the budgets. So that's generally how it works.
Right. So it's predictable inflation, and it might not inflate if it doesn't fit the right rules. So let's talk about some of the ideas that you're going to be talking about here in the conference, and this won't go public until later. So, okay. So one of them is the Decentralized API, And I'm not sure I understand what it is. I believe it's a way that clients can connect to the network and utilize technology. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about it.
Sure. So the idea behind the second tier network is that you have this collateralized second tier, which in our network is about 40% of the total coins, so it's Sybil proof. And based off of that, you do the voting, you do the funding, you do the governance, and then all of these new ideas showed up, which we've been using, and we can do so many things that we had never thought of. And so one of these is this decentralized API. And in simple terms, what we want to do is create a mobile interface where you can talk to the network through that acts like a centralized API, except it's not. And we do actions on the network as group actions. And so what happens is when you do a decentralized API request, it gets executed on 7 servers at the same time. And these are deterministically picked by the proof of work, so you can't fake that portion. And they all do the same thing. They get the same result, and then they sign it with their private keys. They return you the result and the 7 signatures. Therefore, you know if anything was tampered with. Based on this, we can implement really neat features. So since we have the second tier, what if you put storage? So you require storage on each individual node on the second tier. Now suddenly we have about 40 terabytes of storage on the network, sharded. And so we could store things like friends lists and your transaction history and things like that that are encrypted. So when you log in with a username, you log in with your password, you request the information from the network itself, like, hey, who are my friends? Can I get my private data? You decrypt it, and suddenly you're up to date with everything. And now you can send money to friends by name. Because if me and you were friends on the network, we would negotiate keys between us. So I would know your next 5 keys, you would know my next 5 keys, and I could pay you by name. I would burn one of the keys, you would send me another one, and then rinse and repeat. And so this is how our next network will function.
Personally, I think that that's a huge ease of use feature. I've been getting paid in Bitcoin for 2 years, and you constantly have to go and update the private key or the public key, or else everybody's going to know what your public key is. And if you want to keep your privacy, you want to keep refreshing, but there's no automated way to share public keys lists. So that's fantastic, and the identity stuff, great. You're talking about friends lists, and it seems that there's a trend that Dash is moving to, and there's a lot of companies that are kind of looking at a little bit about social markets, which are sort of social networks enabled with financial technology, which is just basically made for Bitcoin and crypto and blockchain technology, or Dash. And so want to tell us a little bit about what your vision is there?
Yeah, so once you have the friends list implemented and you have these very normal features like you would have with PayPal, like you have contacts, or you can send to email and things like that with PayPal. So you could do a similar thing with this network after this is implemented. And by that, let's say I get on, I invite my closest 10 friends, and then they get on and then they invite their closest 10 friends, and then it becomes a social network of money. And everyone's just connected to their friends, and I imagine the first use case will just be for paying people back, or selling somebody a couch or things like that, which would be really easy to do with a system like this.
This is sort of like a social network. Are you looking at integrating this kind of technology with a current social network, or maybe starting your own social network? How do you see the actual sort of path to that stage?
We have no plans on integrating it with like a service like what ChangeTip does, or something like that, where you can tip people on the internet. They would pretty much have to have an identity on the network for you to send money to them. And so it's its own social network. But the idea is that by allowing this ease of use function where you can search for your friends by their username or their email, if they want to, if they don't want to be publicly searchable, then they won't be as well. So there's still some privacy as well. But then there's ease of use, and you don't have to remember all these keys. And I think that it'll make it so easy to use that we'll actually get some, normal people using it that don't have any experience with crypto. And I think that's really the point.
Yeah, I think moving to identities is a huge ease of use step. Identities are kind of an interesting problem, though. It's sort of like domain names. You could think of them as domain names. But you have to get the balance right. Namecoin has been having problems lately. I think there's been some bad press. I haven't followed it too much, but I think one of the problems was that once you bought a Namecoin domain, it was yours forever, and so people, I think, were stockpiling them. And so, how are you thinking about the scarcity of these identities? Are they, if you buy Evan Duffield domain, is it gone, or can I get another one with the same and stuff like that?
The plan currently was to implement something where you enter your username and you set up an account and then you fund it, and after that whole process is complete, then it's done, and now you have the reservation. And so maybe what could happen is that if you remove your money from the network and you stop using it, then it expires after a certain time. Because we're just storing these identities on the sharded data system. It's not a blockchain in the classic sense, where you can actually remove data from it. So we could definitely invalidate these identities if no one's using them.
Excellent. So we're talking now about decentralized storage, and this is a huge topic. A lot of people are very excited about this. Storj, MaidSafe, big names in this space. Is Dash getting into decentralized storage?
I would say no. The idea here is more just to store users' metadata and some of their private data that they want to store in an encrypted way on our network. And the idea here is that I can log in on my Android phone, and then I can go home and I can log in on the browser with the same username and password, and both of these devices will be in sync. Like if I added a friend on one, it'll automatically add it on the other. And so there's really no management of like trying to move a wallet here or any of that. It's just all automatic. So that's the part that seems centralized, but it's not.
And the files are shredded, encrypted, and then there's redundancy, and then they're stored in masternode storage, like masternode computers that provide that storage extra space, right? That's basically, to my understanding, what Storj is trying to do, what MaidSafe are trying to do as far as the decentralized storage. Do you see, are there any limitations that would keep that from evolving into the decentralized internet, or decentralized web hosting, decentralized storage that people are so excited about?
Well, it could be used like that. And I expect people to fork the project and do things like that to make a competitor to Storj or, but I don't think that it's the right path for Dash, because we have enough on our plate to do this technology with the friends list and this API and Dash Drive just alone. And I don't think we really want to be storing random data on the network. This is more data that is crucial to the people's installation on their phone, and it's crucial to their specific account. So it's information they're storing that they want later that's related to the payments and their specific account, not like a file that they want saved on the network.
So, and the access to these resources, the way that people could interact with this technology would be through the decentralized API. Let's talk about the resource management of the API. I think that you mentioned that there's ways to prevent abuse. And anybody can interact with the API without necessarily having a master node or a full node. What are the requirements to ask the API questions or give it information?
Okay, so that's a really interesting question. There's a whole model of security here, and basically what it comes down to is you have an identity on the network. It's a username, and that goes back to a 64-bit integer, which is your real identity. And then you can use what we call blind keys, which hide your real identity, but when you do things on the network, you're still incurring query time cost. And so since masternodes are actually executing these commands, we can take the amount of time average that was used and then charge it to the user account. And so all of the user accounts are actually free to use up to a certain point. And so what we want to do is get 90% of the users in this free zone, and then 10% of the users would have to pay for extra. So you could purchase extra processing time on the network if you were like a large merchant or something, and then everyone else just uses it for free. And the reason why this works is because our second tier network is actually incentivized. So we're subsidizing the cost from the actual blockchain of the users that are utilizing it.
That's very exciting. And giving free access to 90% of the users is one of those strategies that seem to work very well for a lot of companies. WhatsApp is one of the biggest voice over IP chat messaging systems, and what they did is they just opened it up to anybody, and then after a year they start charging a little bit, and it blows up. So that's great stuff. Let's talk about anonymity a little bit, because Dash was sort of famous for this, and this is one of the core elements of Dash is protecting user privacy when they want that, and by default. How does this identity system and interaction with the identity system interact with the privacy concerns and the values that a lot of libertarians or users in Bitcoin have?
So there's still privacy on the network, and we highly value privacy. And so the argument for privacy is more about fungibility. We don't want our users being spied on in the long term. And so when designing the system, we've made a distinction. We're separating the user identities from the payments that they do on the network. And so when they get put into the blockchain, there's no connection anymore, and the network can't follow you. Also, when you access the network, you're only hitting a few servers. You'll hit 7 to about 15 servers. And then every time you hit the network, you can hit a different quorum. And so what happens is you spread out your footprint among this entire network that's all over the earth, and no one can really tell what you're doing then. And so the users get privacy, but we can still, make sure that they're not abusing the system, because it all goes through their identity originally, which then they're accruing that query time.
And you mentioned the word quorum. This is, to my understanding, sort of like a randomly selected group of servers that are the ones that will be serving you the API and the information.
Yeah, so quorums, if you think about the Bitcoin blockchain and the proof of work, you can create a random number generator, and you can actually seed it with the proof of work from a known block. And what happens is, if everyone on the network does the same thing, they all get the same numbers out of this random number generator, because they're really not random. But then that sequence of numbers is very, very secure. And so what you do is you take the masternode list, and then you sort it by the proof of work hash using this randomized method. And then by taking 1 to 10, the first 1 to 10 entries in the list, that's one quorum. 11 to 20 is the next quorum, etc. And so these are secure subsets of masternodes that no one on the network can really predict or tamper with. And then those are the ones that do the work in group actions and then sign the results, which then go back to the user.
Let's talk a little bit about scalability. So the Hong Kong conference is happening right now, basically as we speak, talking about Bitcoin scalability and how to overcome those big challenges in blockchain technology that I think a lot of people have yet to overcome. There's some organizations that are claiming to have maybe solved it, but how are you looking at this from Dash's perspective?
I think the incentive structure of Dash is the right one to go with for a system that scales, with many, many, many users. And the reason for that is because when you give a percentage of the blockchain to the infrastructure, you create a market. And this market has equilibrium with the second tier. And so it'll figure out how many servers it can support from within that market. And what happens as a currency grows is that these markets get bigger. more users means more monies in the ecosystem, means the markets have more money, which means the servers either can be bigger or we can have more of them. And so it is a scalability solution in itself. And we've proven it works. I think that the Dash project should be used as an example of a two-tier strategy for fixing the Bitcoin scalability issues. And I believe that if they implemented a variant of this technology, that they could actually remove the block size limitation and scale the system, and it would actually perform really, really well.
There's three camps, more or less, in the blockchain size debate, to my understanding, right? So there's the small block people. They want to keep them small and keep Bitcoin as a payment layer internationally. There's the big block people that says, no, all transactions should be there. There's a bunch of people in the middle. And then there's this other corner that is rarely talked about, which is, I think it's pioneered by Justice Ranvier. And he's talking about completely creating as much of a free market as you can within the blockchain, so that block size and bandwidth costs and node incentives, it's all a free market, and it's not some sort of top-down regulatory style decision that decides how big the block size is, but there's a market, an order book for this. Where would you sort of place yourself in that?
I think the Bitcoin debate on the block size is really interesting, and I would lean more toward the camp that they shouldn't increase it right now because of the full node count issue. I believe and I've studied this for a few months now, and I've been studying whether the transaction volume average correlates inversely to the full node count. And from what I found, and I've done some statistical modeling on it, is that they are indeed correlated. And when you impact one of these numbers, you do impact the other one. And so if you raise the block size limitation, then you're causing more bandwidth on the network, and that more bandwidth will then drive down the full nodes. And so I think we definitely need a good solution to it. And I think the solution does come back to something like Dash did. We need some kind of market that compensates these people in a permanent way that's scalable.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to do Facebook questions now. Patrick Wabe asks, sidechains on the blockchain, on the Bitcoin blockchain versus Dash. How do you look at sidechains and the potential clone going on sidechains like may happen to Ethereum soon?
Well, okay, so the sidechain issue is really interesting. The Ethereum clone is a really well-developed idea, I think. And Rootstock's interesting because it's actually supported by one of the Bitcoin core developers, which is also an interesting point. So I'm really interested to see what they do with that, because it actually might be kind of different from Ethereum. As for sidechains and Dash, it's hard to recreate Dash because you need an actual blockchain that's separate from Bitcoin that has its own monetary value, because you're rewarding people for running the nodes, and they need to be compensated for running them, right? So how do you do that with a sidechain that is part of the Bitcoin network and carries no value other than just being another token?
Interestingly enough, I actually shared an article that I wrote in Cointelegraph about how Dash works and the governance assistance with Vidny Gutpa, who is Ethereum, and apparently the Rootstock people, I think you were telling me maybe about it, that the Rootstock people are sort of starting to think about implementing something like Dash, like Dash's governance system on Rootstock. Do you have any ideas how that might happen, or anything you want to share on that?
So they have a very interesting approach, and they're looking for a few different solutions. And I've been talking to them over the past few days about implementing something similar to what we've done, just in a completely different way. And so it'll be interesting to see what they come up with.
Christoph Atlas asks, I'm curious if he tracks progress of privacy improvements on Bitcoin versus Dash, and what he thinks about the level of progress this last couple of years. Interesting question. The progress in Bitcoin is always slow.
and especially for fungibility, because that's a sensitive topic in the Bitcoin community. But I think that we really need to focus on scalability now. That is the primary problem in Bitcoin at this point, because we've reached the limitation of we're almost at full blocks pretty much all the time now. So that is much more pressing. Fungibility will become an issue after we resolve that again. It's still an issue that hasn't been resolved, though.
To follow up on that question, there's a few companies out there that are doing blockchain analytics on Bitcoin. Do you know anything about the kind of techniques that they have, and do you have any concerns as far as them focusing on Dash at some point?
Well, I'm more concerned about them focusing on the Bitcoin ecosystem because its ledger is a lot less private than ours. In ours, coins are randomly anonymized, and you can't cross that boundary. And so you can't follow back history very far. So if you identify somebody, you can identify a little bit of their history, but not that much. Whereas on the Bitcoin network, if you identify a few key places, you can figure out what somebody's done for months even. And that can be an issue. Some of these companies are using statistical methods of figuring it out, and some really advanced algorithms that do work, and I believe that they will have a pretty good database of trying to figure out the identities of these people and then begin selling it, which we really want to protect our users from. I don't think that type of data should be able to be sold to companies and whatnot.
I have to say I agree with that, but yeah, I'm the journalist. I shouldn't have opinions. Okay, Ruben asks, what are your favorite 3 cryptocurrencies, and short explanation maybe?
All right, so I would say Primecoin, Quark, and Litecoin. And so there's a really interesting reason for this. Primecoin's where I got the difficulty algorithm idea from. And mine doesn't work as well as theirs did. Theirs was a little bit better, but that's where I got the idea from nonetheless. And then Quark, because of the chaining algorithm for hashing. That's where I got that idea from. And then Litecoin, because it's the fork that first started Dash. And so these are the 3 that really got me going into the Dash project.
Excellent. Is there an ETA for the Dash Evolution release? Where are you guys in the development?
So we're going to try a brand new approach to development this time around that I don't think's ever been tried before. We don't have a clear path. We have a very structured idea of how these things should work, and now we want to team up with the community, open source all of the documents, and actually figure it out as a community of what we really want. It's essentially going to be a giant conversation with thousands of people to try to figure out the path, the best path that most people want. Because we don't want to create something that people don't want to use, right? So if we make all of our users happy, that's the primary goal. And as for an ETA, we're looking for a prototype within about 2 months, and then after that, we should have something more concrete in maybe a year and a half. It's definitely going to take some time. It's a very, very large project.
How does it feel to be in the center or very close to the center of what I argue is a kind of cyber organism? I think unlike any other project where you have external funding and it's much more maybe centralized. Right now, I think Dash is the best example I can think of a decentralized autonomous organization, and its funding mechanism is internal and based on the value of its coin. How does it feel to be in so decentralized a community in such a fast developing space?
It's quite interesting. It never is boring. And I mean, the things we're doing are really exciting. So just implementing the decentralized voting and funding and governance and just watching it being used by the community is just phenomenal. And then the community at large is just full of other interesting ideas as well. I think the entire thing could be considered a giant organism. But I definitely agree that we're probably the first decentralized autonomous organization because, I mean, it's completely self-funded. Dash is completely self-funded, which means that it can survive on its own after all of us leave. It defeats the first adopter problem, which I think is critical. You get first adopters, which get coins cheap. They do work because they're incentivized, but the second adopters and third adopters and fourth adopters aren't. So who's going to take over the really, really laborious, terrible task of managing Bitcoin Core later? And you basically hand them this thing and say, if you screw up billions of dollars of infrastructure. Have fun. And then who pays them? It's a hard problem to solve, and I think we have a good solution. So I'm really excited for that. I'm really excited to see where it goes.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add? Any ideas you'd like to share?
Yeah, so we're open sourcing the Dash evolution, and it's going to be open for conversation about where we go in the direction of it. So I'd like everyone to get involved in kind of telling us what they think of it and coming up with improvements so that we can build the best thing possible. And so I encourage you to come over to dashevolution.com and check out the documents and see what we're working on and collaborate. Help us out.
Excellent. Thank you very much.